The night was cold and silent. Wind howled across the lonely fields, rattling the thin metal walls of the human's small farmhouse. He sat near the dim glow of a lantern, fixing an old tool with steady hands. Life on this alien planet was always harsh, but he was used to it. Silence was his closest friend. That was why the sound startled him. A soft, uneven knock. Not strong, not confident. More like the hand of someone too weak to stand. He froze, his heart thumping in his chest. No one ever came here. He lived far from the trade routes, far from the settlements. So who could it be? The knock came again, this time slower, like it might be the last attempt. He grabbed his rifle, moving carefully toward the door. Out here, visitors often meant trouble. Pirates, scavengers, or desperate refugees. He pushed the door open with caution, and the cold night air rushed in. For a moment, he thought his eyes were playing tricks. A tall figure stood outside, trembling in a torn royal cloak. Beside her, a small child clung to her legs. The woman's silver hair was tangled, her crown broken, and her once bright clothes stained with dirt and blood. Her daughter, barely 6 or 7 years old, looked up with wide eyes full of fear. "Please," the woman's voice cracked, rough from crying and exhaustion. "Please, accept me." The human didn't answer at first. He stared at her, his mind racing. He knew her face. Every trader, every villager, every soldier knew her face. She was the princess of this planet's ruling house. He had seen her image on banners and coins when he first arrived. A princess begging at his door? Impossible. But the way she shook in the cold, the way her child coughed against her chest, it was real. His finger stayed close to the trigger of his rifle. This could be a trap. What if soldiers waited in the darkness, ready to ambush the fool who opened his door? He scanned the fields, but saw no movement, only shadows bending in the wind. The princess noticed his hesitation. She lowered herself to her knees in the mud, ignoring how the cold bit at her skin. The child followed her, bowing her little head. "We have nowhere else to go," the princess whispered, voice breaking with shame. "They want us dead. My daughter, she will not survive the night without warmth." The girl coughed again, a small, weak sound that pierced his chest more than any blade could. She was so tiny, her hands blue from the cold, her breath shallow. He remembered another winter, long ago, back on Earth. His younger sister had coughed like that, weak and fragile, before sickness took her away. He had never forgiven himself for not saving her. He lowered the rifle slightly, but kept his guard. "Why me?" he asked, his voice low and rough. "Why come here?" The princess lifted her head, meeting his eyes. "Because you are human. My people say humans are stubborn, kind, even to strangers. Please, for her sake, not mine." Her words cut through him. He hated the thought of being dragged into royal affairs, into politics and blood feuds that weren't his. He came to this planet to escape all that. But as he looked at the little girl's pale face, he felt his resolve breaking. She didn't choose to be hunted. She didn't choose this life. A sudden gust of wind made the girl stumble. Without thinking, he reached forward, steadying her small shoulders. Her skin was ice cold. She looked up at him with watery eyes and whispered one word, weak but clear. "Please." Something inside him cracked. He couldn't push them back into the night. He couldn't close the door and pretend he hadn't heard their knock. He cursed under his breath, then stepped aside. "Get in," he said firmly. The princess gasped, relief flooding her tired eyes. She held her daughter close and guided her inside quickly, as if she feared he might change his mind. The human closed the door behind them, bolting it shut. The storm outside pressed against the walls, but in here, the small fire still burned. The girl stumbled toward the warmth, her tiny hands stretched out. He hurried to throw another log into the fire, watching the flames grow. The princess sank to the floor beside her daughter, wrapping her cloak tighter around the child. For the first time, the little one gave a faint smile, her face glowing orange in the firelight. The human stood back, rifle still in hand, his eyes never leaving them. The princess noticed his suspicion. "You think this is a trick," she said softly. "I cannot blame you, but I swear, I only ask for a night, only until my daughter is safe." He studied her, her royal dignity broken, her pride stripped away. She was not lying. No queen would kneel in mud, no princess would shiver in torn clothes, if she had a choice. Something terrible had happened, and now she had landed at his door. He sighed, finally lowering his rifle and setting it against the wall. "You can stay," he muttered, "but if trouble follows you, it falls on my land." Understand? The princess bowed her head. I understand, and I am grateful. The child leaned against her, drifting into sleep at last. For a moment, the farmhouse was quiet again, but the human knew silence would not last. Trouble always came for royalty, and now it would come for him. Still, as he watched the little girl breathe more calmly by the fire, he knew he had made the only choice his heart would allow. Outside, in the darkness beyond the fields, unseen eyes watched the farmhouse from a distance. The knock at the door was only the beginning. The small farmhouse was quiet, except for the crackling of the fire. The human sat on his wooden chair, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, his eyes fixed on the woman and her child. The girl was wrapped in a rough blanket now, breathing softly as she slept, but her cough still echoed faintly in the room from time to time. The princess stroked her daughter's hair, her own face pale and worn. She looked nothing like the proud figure he remembered from banners and royal speeches. She looked broken, yet her eyes carried a strange strength, like she was forcing herself to stay calm for her daughter's sake. He finally broke the silence. You should explain. Why are you here? Why are you running? His voice was firm, almost sharp, because he needed answers. He had just let the most hunted woman on the planet into his home. If soldiers arrived, his farm would burn, and he might die with them. The princess lifted her head slowly. You deserve the truth, she whispered. Her voice was soft but heavy with sadness. She looked at the flames for a moment before speaking. My own people turned against me. My family's court was poisoned with greed. The generals wanted power. They saw my daughter as a threat, so they killed my guards, hunted me through the night, and spread word that I was dead. She paused, swallowing hard. But I am not dead, and they will not stop until I am. The human leaned back, his jaw tightening. So you brought danger to my door. I had no choice, she said, her voice trembling but honest. We were starving. I had to hide from my own soldiers. For days we slept in caves, ate wild roots. My daughter nearly froze in my arms. I thought she would not make it. Her eyes watered, but she forced herself not to cry. She pressed her lips together and took her daughter's small hand in hers. If she dies, then I have failed as a mother and as a princess. I cannot let that happen. He studied her closely. He could see her pride fighting against her desperation. This was not a woman used to begging. This was someone who once had power, respect, and command. But all of that was gone now. She was reduced to kneeling in front of a stranger, clinging to her child's life. His instincts screamed at him to send them away. He had come to this world to avoid war, politics, and royal struggles. Yet something about her words stuck in his chest. She had not asked for safety for herself. She had begged only for her daughter. That alone made her different from the power-hungry nobles he despised. He poured some hot water into a small cup and placed it near her. Drink, he said. You sound like you've swallowed dust for days. She hesitated, then bowed her head slightly in gratitude before sipping. Her hands shook as she held the cup, but the warmth gave her a little strength back. What about the girl? He asked. She's sick. She needs more than firelight to survive. The princess nodded quickly. She has been coughing for days. Her chest burns. I tried to find medicine, but every town is watched. If I go near, they will capture us. The human rubbed his forehead. He had some herbs stored away, simple remedies for colds and fevers. They weren't strong enough for royalty, perhaps, but maybe they could ease the girl's pain. He stood and fetched a small bundle of dried leaves, crushing them into hot water. The bitter smell filled the room. Make her drink this, he said. It will help her breathe. The princess held the cup carefully, lifting her daughter slightly and pressing it to her lips. The girl stirred, whimpering, but sipped a little before falling back into uneasy sleep. The princess looked at the human, her eyes softer now. You saved her tonight. For that, I owe you more than I can repay. He shook his head. Don't thank me yet. If soldiers find out you're here, this place will burn. Her gaze darkened. They will come. It is only a matter of time. The human moved to the window, staring out into the dark fields. The night seemed endless, but somewhere out there, hunters could already be on their way. He felt the old weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders again, the same weight he thought he had left behind when he left Earth. Back then, he was just another soldier fighting wars that weren't his. Now here he was again, caught between survival and protecting someone helpless. The princess broke the silence. "Why did you let us in? You could have closed the door and left us to the cold." He didn't look back at her. His voice was low, almost bitter. "Because I know what it feels like to lose someone. I couldn't let a child freeze in front of me." The princess studied him, her eyes narrowing with curiosity. For the first time, she saw past the rough clothes and calloused hands. This human was carrying something heavy from his past, something that made him act even when he didn't want to. She wondered what kind of man he really was. The fire crackled, filling the silence again. The princess leaned back, holding her daughter close. Exhaustion pulled at her body, but she forced herself to stay awake. She knew danger was never far. If the hunters came, she needed to be ready. The human finally turned, his face hard with decision. "You can stay for now, but you tell me everything. Who's chasing you? How many? What they want? If trouble's coming, I need to know what I'm facing." The princess nodded. "I will tell you everything I can, but I warn you. The men chasing us are not ordinary soldiers. They are trained assassins, loyal only to power. They will not stop, not until they see my body on the ground." The human's grip tightened on his rifle. He glanced at the small child, sleeping so innocently, unaware of the danger around her. He muttered under his breath, almost to himself, "Then we'll just have to be ready for them." The princess looked at him, a flicker of hope in her tired eyes. For the first time since her world collapsed, she did not feel completely alone. The night dragged on with heavy silence. The farmhouse stood like a lonely island in the middle of dark, frozen fields. The human sat near the window with his rifle across his lap, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows outside. His instincts told him something was wrong. The air itself felt tense, as if the land was holding its breath. Behind him, the princess rested against the wall, her daughter curled up in her lap, finally sleeping in warmth after days of fear. But her peace would not last. The first sign came with the faint crunch of boots on frozen soil. The human stiffened, his muscles tightening as he leaned toward the window. At first, he thought it might be the wind moving through the crops. But no, this was different. Steady. Careful. Too careful. Someone was moving toward the house. He whispered over his shoulder, "Stay quiet. Don't move." The princess lifted her head immediately, her eyes narrowing in fear. She clutched her daughter tighter, her body tense like a cornered animal. She had heard footsteps like that before, many times during their escape. It always meant death was near. The human blew out the lantern, letting darkness fill the room. Only the fire's weak glow remained, hidden enough not to shine through the cracks in the walls. He crouched low, his rifle ready, his breath steady. A shadow passed near the barn, then another, then more. He counted at least 4 shapes moving silently, their armor catching faint glimmers of starlight. Soldiers. No, assassins, just like the princess had warned. They crept closer, spreading around the house like wolves circling prey. The human's jaw clenched. They weren't here to arrest anyone. They were here to kill. One assassin stepped up to the window, peering in with cold, glowing eyes. Before he could react, the human slammed the butt of his rifle against the wall, distracting him, and in the same motion rolled across the floor, aiming at the door. A loud thud followed. The door shook violently as someone tried to force it open. The princess gasped, but covered her daughter's mouth quickly to keep her silent. The human raised his finger to his lips, signaling her to stay quiet. The wooden door creaked again, ready to burst. Suddenly, glass shattered. The assassin at the window smashed through with a blade raised high. But the human was faster. He fired a single shot, the blast deafening in the small room. The assassin dropped instantly, his armored body slamming against the floor. The girl woke with a frightened cry, but the princess held her close, whispering, "Shh, my star. Stay quiet." The door burst open and 2 more assassins rushed inside. Their weapons glimmered in the firelight, curved blades meant for silent, quick deaths. The human didn't back away. Instead, he flipped the table toward them, blocking their path, and fired again. The shot hit one in the chest, throwing him back into the night. The second ducked low and slashed at the table, sparks flying. The human didn't have time to reload. He swung the rifle like a club, smashing it into the assassin's helmet. The soldier staggered, and in that moment the human kicked him hard in the knee. A crack echoed as the leg bent the wrong way. The assassin fell, groaning, before the human grabbed the blade from his hand and ended it swiftly. The princess was frozen, her heart pounding. She had seen battles before, but never a human fight like this. He was fast, brutal, and clever. He fought like someone who had lived his whole life surviving impossible odds. She finally understood why humans were feared in stories told among her people. But it was not over. More shadows moved outside. 3, maybe 4. The human knew he couldn't hold them off forever inside the house. He turned to the princess. "Take her. Hide in the cellar. Don't come out until I say." She shook her head. "You'll be killed." "Do as I say," he snapped, his eyes blazing. The princess wanted to argue, but when she saw the determination in his face, she obeyed. She carried her daughter to the trapdoor beneath the rug, slipping into the darkness just as the next assassin crashed through the back door. The human ducked behind the doorway, swinging the stolen blade in a sharp arc that sliced across the attacker's arm. The assassin hissed in pain, spinning to strike, but the human drove his shoulder into him, forcing him against the wall. The struggle was violent, fast, and desperate. Finally, the human shoved the blade deep into the assassin's chest, pinning him like broken armor to the wooden boards. The last two burst in together, one through the front, one through the side. Now outnumbered, the human knew brute strength alone would not win. He grabbed a burning log from the fire and hurled it into the dried hay stacked near the door. Flames leapt up, filling the room with smoke and chaos. The assassins hesitated, their vision clouded. That was all he needed. He struck one low, sweeping his legs out, then finished him quickly. The other raised his blade. But the human grabbed a heavy iron pan from the stove and smashed it into his helmet with such force that the man crumpled. The house reeked of smoke and blood. Bodies lay scattered across the floor. The human's chest heaved, sweat dripping down his face, but his eyes were still sharp, still searching for more threats. For a moment, it seemed quiet again. Too quiet. The princess crawled from the cellar, holding her daughter close, coughing from the smoke. She looked around at the bodies and then at the human, standing tall with the stolen blade in his hand. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "You fought them all, alone." He shook his head. "Not all. More will come. This was just the first wave." She felt her blood run cold. She had thought maybe they would stop after tonight, but he was right. Assassins didn't give up. They would return, in greater numbers. Still, her eyes locked on him with something new, something like respect. This man had stood against trained killers and lived, and he had done it not for himself, but for her and her daughter. For the first time since her fall from the throne, she felt a small spark of hope. The human wiped his blade clean and looked at her. His voice was steady, hard as steel. "If they want you, they'll have to come through me again." The princess held her daughter tighter. She didn't say it out loud, but deep inside she believed something she had never thought before. Perhaps this human was the only reason they were still alive. Morning came slowly, painting the sky with pale light. Smoke still lingered around the farmhouse, and the smell of blood mixed with the sharp cold of the air. The human stood outside, burying the bodies of the assassins in shallow graves far from his crops. His hands worked fast, his face hard and silent. He did not speak, not even to himself. He had done this before, too many times. Burying enemies was not new to him, but something inside felt heavier than before. This was no longer just his fight, yet he had stepped into it anyway. Inside, the princess sat by the fire with her daughter pressed close. The girl was awake now, her cough a little softer after drinking more of the bitter medicine. She watched the door carefully, waiting for the human to return. Her small eyes followed every shadow, afraid that another soldier might come. The princess stroked her hair, whispering soft words in her own language, trying to calm her. But her own heart was full of fear. She knew last night was only the beginning. When the human came back in, covered in dirt and sweat, the princess stood. "You should not have risked yourself for us," she said quietly, though her voice carried emotion. He set his tools down and looked at her with a tired expression. "What was I supposed to do? Let them take you? Let the child die?" Her eyes softened, but she lifted her chin with pride. "I was raised to believe humans were selfish, that you think only of yourselves, but you fought for us, without asking for reward." He gave a short laugh, but it was bitter. "You don't know humans as well as you think. We're not saints. We bleed, we break, we regret. But sometimes. He glanced at the girl, who was watching him with wide eyes. Sometimes we don't walk away, even when we should. The princess studied him in silence. She saw the scars across his arms, the wariness in his eyes. He had been through battles long before this night. A man who carried ghosts, yet still stood strong. For the first time, she felt something stir inside her. A strange respect for someone she had once thought beneath her caste. The little girl broke the silence. She crawled from her mother's lap, dragging the blanket with her, and walked toward the human. Her steps were slow, careful, but her eyes were bright with trust. She tugged at his sleeve. "Protect her," she whispered, her small voice shaking. He froze. No one had called him that in years, not since the battlefield where he failed to save his own squad. The word cut through him, both painful and healing at the same time. He looked down at her, unsure what to say. But when she leaned against him, resting her tiny head on his arm, something inside him melted. He placed his rough hand gently on her back, steadying her small body. The princess watched with wide eyes. Her daughter was shy with strangers, always frightened, but now she clung to the human as if he were her only safe place. The princess's heart twisted. She felt shame, pride, and fear all at once. "You are winning her trust," the princess said softly. "I don't want her trust," he replied quickly, though his hand still rested on the child's back. "Trust is dangerous. It makes you weak." The girl looked up at him with innocent eyes and whispered, "You are not weak." He swallowed hard, unable to argue. Hours passed, and the farmhouse slowly returned to quiet. The human repaired the door and set new traps around the property, hidden snares and alarm lines only a trained soldier would think of. The princess followed him at a distance, carrying wood for the fire. She wanted to help, though her royal hands were not used to such labor. He noticed her struggle, but said nothing. Part of him wanted her to see that survival was not about titles or crowns. It was about effort. As the sun dipped low, they sat near the fire again. The princess broke the silence this time. "When I was in the palace, I believed strength came from armies, from power, from the fear others felt when they looked at me. But now—" She paused, her eyes fixed on the flames. "Now I see strength is something else. It is standing against death, even when you are alone." The human said nothing. He only stared into the fire, but her words sank deep. Her gaze shifted to him. "You could have sent us away. Yet you fight. Why?" He turned to her slowly, his face unreadable. "Because once I couldn't protect someone who needed me, and I swore I'd never let it happen again." The princess lowered her eyes. She understood without him saying more. Pain lived inside him, just as it lived inside her. For the first time, she did not see him as just a human farmer. She saw a man shaped by loss, carrying a strength her people would never understand. That night, as the girls slept between them, the princess whispered quietly, her voice trembling, "I owe you my life, and hers. Whether you want it or not, you have it." The human looked at her, his expression guarded, but deep inside something shifted. He didn't want bonds, didn't want to carry anyone's loyalty. Yet as he watched her eyes, tired, proud, but honest, he felt the weight of loneliness ease just a little. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, but inside the farmhouse there was a fragile warmth. It was not trust, not yet. But it was the beginning of something stronger than either of them could admit. The next day was cold and gray, the sky heavy with dark clouds that threatened rain. The human worked outside, checking his traps along the edge of the fields, while the princess stayed inside with her daughter. The girl was finally breathing more easily, though her cough still came now and then. She clung to her mother's side, asking softly if the bad men would return. The princess could only stroke her hair and whisper, "Not while he is here." But deep down, she knew danger was not gone. The human came back with tense eyes. "Tracks," he said simply. "Fresh ones. Someone passed near the farm this morning." The princess stiffened. "Soldiers?" "Could be," he muttered, placing his rifle against the wall. "Or villagers. But either way, someone knows this place isn't empty anymore." That night, they ate a small meal in silence. The princess and her daughter sat close to the fire while the human kept glancing at the door. The crackle of flames was the only sound until a distant noise broke it, a howl of engines, faint but growing. The human's head snapped up. His face darkened. "They found us," he said in a hard voice. The princess's hands trembled as she pulled her daughter close. The sound grew louder until lights flickered outside, moving like shadows across the fields. Not assassins this time. Too many. The human peeked through a small gap in the wall. A group of villagers stood with torches, and behind them were armored soldiers. One of the villagers shouted something in their native tongue, pointing directly at the farmhouse. The princess felt her blood run cold. Someone had betrayed them. The soldiers moved forward in a line, confident, knowing they had the numbers. The human cursed under his breath and checked his weapon. "Get her in the cellar," he ordered. The princess shook her head. "You cannot fight them all." "Hide her," he barked, his voice sharp. "If they see her, she's gone." Reluctantly, the princess obeyed. She guided her daughter to the cellar, whispering promises that everything would be fine, though her heart was breaking. When she came back up, the human was already dragging furniture to block the windows. Torches lit the night as the soldiers surrounded the house. A voice rang out. "Give us the princess and the child, human. Do this, and we will spare you." The human's jaw tightened. He shouted back, "You'll get nothing from me." His words echoed through the night. The soldiers didn't wait. They rushed forward, slamming against the barricaded door, while others tried to climb through the windows. The house shook under the assault. The princess grabbed a blade from one of the fallen assassins, her hands trembling but her eyes fierce. The human glanced at her. "You ever used one of those?" She nodded once. "Enough to draw blood." The door cracked. Soldiers poured in, and the fight exploded. The human fired his rifle, dropping the first two. The princess slashed at another who tried to grab her, surprising him with her speed. More kept coming, shouting in their harsh voices, blades and spears flashing in the firelight. The human fought like a storm, moving from one to another, striking with rifle, fists, and anything he could grab. He set off one of his hidden traps, and a soldier screamed as spikes shot up from the floor. The princess stayed close, protecting the cellar door with all her strength. But the numbers were too many. For every soldier who fell, two more pushed in. The villagers outside cheered for blood, their torches lighting the sky. The human's face was covered in sweat and dirt, his arms heavy from swinging and firing, but he did not back down. Then, in the chaos, the princess saw him stumble. A soldier's blade cut across his shoulder, leaving blood pouring down. She cried out and struck the attacker down with her own blade, fury in her eyes. She dropped beside the human, pressing her hand against his wound. "You cannot fall," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Not now." He gritted his teeth, shoving her hand away. "Don't waste time on me. Protect the girl." The soldiers regrouped outside, preparing for another charge. The human could hear their commander shouting orders. This wasn't random. They wanted the princess alive. But then she looked at him with a pale face and whispered the truth she had kept hidden until now. "They don't only want me. They want her. My daughter is the heir." The human froze. "Heir?" She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "If they kill her, the bloodline ends. No one will challenge their power. That is why they hunt us without mercy." The human's blood ran cold. He understood now. This wasn't just about a runaway princess. It was about a future queen. That small child sleeping below them wasn't just a little girl. She was hope for an entire people. The human reloaded his rifle with shaking hands. His face hardened into steel. "Then they'll never touch her. Not while I'm breathing." The princess stared at him, her chest tight. For the first time, she realized he wasn't just helping out of pity or duty. He had already bound himself to their fate. She felt both fear and relief in her heart. Fear for the storm that was coming, relief that they were not alone. Outside, the commander gave the order to burn the house. Torches flew against the wooden walls, and flames began to spread. Smoke filled the room. The princess coughed, pulling her cloak around her face. The girl cried below in the cellar, terrified by the roar of fire. The human looked around quickly, searching for a way out. The house would not last long. He grabbed the princess's arm. "We can't stay here. Get her. We run." She nodded, rushing to the cellar to lift her daughter out. The girl clung to her, sobbing as the smoke grew thicker. The human smashed open the back wall with his shoulder, creating a gap just big enough to escape. Flames licked at his skin, but he didn't stop. They ran into the cold night, the girl in her mother's arms, the human covering their path with quick shots. Behind them, The farmhouse that had sheltered them burned to the ground. The only safe place they had was gone. The princess looked back with tears in her eyes, but the human kept pushing them forward. "Don't look back," he said, his voice hard. "We're still alive. That's all that matters." And so, under the dark sky and the glow of fire, they vanished into the night, hunted more than ever, but bound together by something stronger than fear. The night swallowed them as they ran. Behind them, the farmhouse burned, flames rising high into the dark sky, smoke twisting like a signal for every enemy to see. The princess carried her daughter in her arms, whispering comfort into her ear, while the human moved ahead, clearing the way with sharp eyes and quick steps. His wounded shoulder throbbed, leaving a trail of blood down his arm, but he pushed forward without slowing. He knew if they stopped now, even for a breath, death would catch them. They reached the edge of the forest, where twisted trees stretched their branches like claws. The human guided them into the shadows, weaving through roots and rocks, his boots silent on the frozen ground. The girl clung to her mother, her wide eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. Every crack of a twig behind them, every howl of the wind made her tremble. The princess kissed her forehead and whispered, "Be brave, my star. He will not let harm come to us." After hours of moving without rest, they reached a small clearing. The human finally stopped, breathing heavily, his body shaking from blood loss. He dropped to one knee, gripping his shoulder. The princess rushed to him, lowering her daughter gently to the ground. "You are bleeding too much," she said in a trembling voice. "You will not last if we do nothing." "I've survived worse," he muttered, though his face was pale. He tried to stand again, but his legs buckled. The princess caught his arm, her royal pride gone, only fear and desperation left. She tore strips from her cloak and pressed them against his wound, her hands firm despite the shaking. He looked at her with narrowed eyes. "Why are you helping me? You should keep your strength for the girl." Her gaze burned with quiet fire. "Because you are the reason we are still alive. Without you, we would already be ash in the flames. Do not ask me to let my protector bleed alone." The human said nothing, but a flicker of emotion crossed his face. He let her work in silence, her hands gentle but determined. The little girl crawled closer, placing her tiny hand on his good arm. "Please don't die," she whispered softly. Her voice was so pure, so full of trust, it pierced the walls he had built around his heart. He sighed, closing his eyes for a moment. "I'll live," he said quietly. "I've made promises before and broken them. I won't break this one." When dawn came, the forest was still. Birds stirred weakly in the cold light. The human managed to stand, leaning on a makeshift staff he had carved from a branch. They had no home now, no fire, no food, but they still had each other, and that was enough for him to keep moving. They traveled deeper into the wilderness, avoiding roads and villages. Days passed like shadows, with only the sound of footsteps and the girl's soft coughs to mark time. The human hunted small animals for food, showing the princess how to set snares. She tried, fumbling at first, but she learned quickly, surprising him with her focus. Royal blood or not, she adapted to survival like a fighter. At night, when the girl slept between them, the princess spoke in low tones. "I never thought I would see myself like this," she admitted. "Once, I was dressed in silk, walking through halls of marble. Now I crouch in dirt, eating from the fire like a peasant." She gave a sad smile. "And yet, I feel freer than I did in the palace." The human raised an eyebrow. "Freedom isn't about silk or dirt. It's about who stands with you when the world wants you gone." She looked at him, her eyes softening. "Then you are freer than most. You stand even when you carry so much pain." He looked away, uncomfortable under her gaze. But her words stayed with him. On the third night, danger came again. They had built a small fire inside a hollow cave, its light hidden from outside. The girl was asleep, breathing more easily now, her small hand curled against her mother's chest. The human was sharpening his blade when he froze. He had heard it, a faint whistle, a signal call in the distance. "They've found us," he said in a low voice. The princess's eyes widened. She reached for her daughter, pulling her close. Footsteps echoed outside the cave, slow and deliberate. Torches flickered against the rock walls. The assassins had returned, and this time they were not alone. An entire squad moved in, armored and silent, their weapons gleaming. The human stood tall, despite the pain in his body. He stepped in front of the princess and the child, blocking the entrance with his own figure. His voice was steady, almost defiant. "If you want them, you'll have to go through me." The commander of the squad stepped forward, his mask cold and cruel. "A single human thinks he can stand against trained killers? You should have left them to die in the snow. Now you will share their fate." The human's grip tightened on his blade. His heart pounded, but his eyes did not waver. He knew he could not win this fight, not against so many. But he would not step aside. Not again. Not after the promises he had broken in the past. The princess stood behind him, her hands shaking as she held her daughter. But her voice rose strong. "He is not alone. If you want my child, you will fight both of us." The assassins laughed, their voices echoing in the cave. But the human didn't laugh. He glanced back at the princess, and for the first time a small, grim smile crossed his face. The battle came swift. The assassins rushed forward, blades flashing, and the human met them head on. He fought with fury, each strike born not of duty but of something stronger, a promise to the little girl who called him protector. The princess, though untrained compared to him, struck with desperate courage, slashing at those who came too close. The cave rang with the clash of steel, the cries of war, and the roar of a man who refused to let go of the fragile family he had found. When the dust settled, the floor was littered with bodies. The human stood in the center, bloodied and swaying, but alive. The princess fell to her knees, clutching her daughter, tears of relief streaming down her face. She looked at him not as a stranger, not even as just a protector, but as something far more, someone who had chosen them over his own safety, again and again. He leaned against the cave wall, breathing heavily, and muttered with a weak grin, "Told you, they'd have to go through me." The little girl ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. The princess followed, her eyes shining with gratitude. In that moment, they were no longer just fugitives and a farmer. They were bound together by fire, blood, and survival, stronger than any vow spoken in a palace. The cave was silent after the battle, except for the sound of the human's heavy breathing. Blood dripped slowly from his wounds, staining the stone floor. The princess knelt beside him, pressing torn cloth against his side to stop the bleeding. Her hands shook, not because of fear, but because she knew how close he had come to death. Her daughter stood near them, her small hands clutching the human's sleeve as if letting go would make him vanish. "You should rest," the princess whispered. The human shook his head weakly. "No time. More will come. They always come." His eyes burned with stubborn fire, even though his body wanted to collapse. For a long moment, the princess stared at him, her chest tight. She had seen nobles, generals, even kings who claimed to be brave. None of them had fought like this man. None had chosen to risk everything for someone not of their blood. He was not her subject, not her guard, not bound by law or crown, yet here he was, standing against her enemies when even her own people had betrayed her. Her daughter tugged at her sleeve. "Mama," she whispered softly, "he saved us again." The princess kissed her child's forehead, holding her close. "Yes, my star," she murmured. "He saved us." They stayed in the cave until dawn, the fire burning low. When the human finally woke after a few hours of restless sleep, he found the princess still watching him, her daughter curled up in her lap. She spoke before he could. "We cannot keep running forever. They will never stop chasing us. We need a place, a home." Her voice broke slightly on the last word. The human sat up slowly, grimacing at the pain in his side. He knew she was right. Running through forests and caves would only end one way, with them cornered. His mind turned toward the distant mountains, where he had once heard of abandoned fortresses from older wars. If they could reach one, they might survive longer. He explained his thought, and the princess nodded. "Then we go there, together." The journey was hard. Days blurred into nights as they climbed rough paths, hiding whenever patrols passed nearby. The girl grew tired often, her small legs stumbling, but the human carried her on his shoulders without complaint. The princess tried to take her when he faltered from his injuries, but he shook his head every time. "I can bear it," he said, and he did. The mountains rose tall, cold, and silent. At last, they found the fortress, broken walls covered in moss, old towers leaning against the wind. But inside there was shelter, space for fire, and thick stone to keep enemies out. It was not a palace, but it was safe. For the first time since that knock on his door, the human allowed himself to breathe easier. They made the fortress their home. The princess cleaned the chambers, the human set traps around the outer walls, and the girl's laughter began to echo in the stone halls. Slowly, the place felt alive again. At night, they sat around the fire, eating what little food they could hunt or gather. Sometimes, the girl would rest her head on the human's chest and call him protector. Each time, his heart tightened, but he never corrected her. The princess began to change too. Her pride was still there, but softer. She no longer looked at him as just a human farmer. She looked at him as the man who carried her daughter when her legs failed, who bled so they could live, who stood like a shield between them and death. More than once, she caught herself staring at him in silence, wondering what fate had bound them together. But danger never fully left. Rumors spread across the land. The princess lived, and with her, the heir. Armies searched, but none could find the fortress. Some whispered of a human warrior who fought shadows and burned assassins in the night. The legend of the protector grew, though few believed it. One evening, the girl asked an innocent question while they shared food by the fire. "Mama, will he stay with us forever?" The princess hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the human. He looked away, but his silence was an answer of its own. Finally, the princess smiled faintly at her daughter. "Yes, my star, he will stay." The human met her gaze then. For once he did not argue. He felt the truth of her words deep inside. He had lost a family once before, but now fate had given him another. He would not walk away. Not again. Seasons passed. The fortress grew warmer, filled with life. The girl grew stronger, her cough fading. She ran across the courtyard, laughing freely, her small feet echoing against stone. The princess walked beside the human, their steps in rhythm, her cloak brushing against his arm. "You gave us more than shelter," she said quietly one day as they watched the child play. "You gave us hope. My people may call me princess, but here you are the reason we live." He did not answer with words. Instead, he simply placed his hand on her shoulder. She did not pull away. That night, when the girl was asleep, the princess whispered something only he could hear. "This fortress was once empty. Now it is a home. Because you are here, whether you believe it or not, you are more than our protector. You are part of us." The human sat in silence for a long time, staring at the fire. Finally, he nodded. "Then I will stay, no matter what comes." And he did. From that day forward, the princess and her daughter were no longer fugitives hiding in the shadows. They were a family, bound not by blood or law, but by choice. The fortress, once abandoned, now stood as their home, glowing with firelight and laughter. The galaxy whispered stories of betrayal and war, but inside those stone walls, a different story was written. The story of a human who chose to protect, a princess who learned to trust, and a child who found a father.